How great would it be to get up close and personal with the beauty industry heroes we love and admire, and to ask them, how did you learn to do what you do? I'm Chris Baran, a hairstylist and educator for 40 plus years, and I'm inviting all our heroes to chat and share the secrets of their success. Well, welcome to another week's Headcases, and I know you're just going to absolutely love this guest because I do as well. A little bit about him. He's an executive coach that helps leaders from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies achieve the outcomes that they're after. He's a frequent speaker at industry events. I know you're going to love him because his presence is warm, he's funny, and sometimes he's got a little touch of irreverence to it. So obviously he's my kind of people. And when I watch him speak, he's engaging. He's great at helping you shift your thinking. He's great at getting you to the truth. He's also the author. He's the author the author of This versus That, which is better thinking, and also Better Choices, Better Leader, and is about leaving the mark, the thinking and skills for behaviors of influencers. And I can't wait to get into it. So let's get into this week's head case, Mr. Jay Williams. Mr. Jay Williams, welcome to Head Cases, and it is an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Well, is it okay if I reserve my feelings about the podcast till the end? Is that okay?
I'll ask the same question at the end.
It's fair because it's like when you get on stage and people clap. I always feel like, make me earn it, right? Just don't give it up that easy. So I will hold on to the end and I will respond.
Okay, we'll ask. Let me make a note here. Ask same question at the end. And I have to preface for those of you listening and watching, it says they're sounding off like God knows what right now. But as you may or may not know, before a podcast, you often go on and get everything working, et cetera. And we've had nothing but shits and giggles the whole time that we've been on beforehand. So I think we set the bar pretty high. So
or low.
I just want to say, low. Or low, yeah, depending on your perspective. So, Jay, I always like to start off with how you got involved in the industry that we're in right now. But I just want to say that, that for the audience that is listening right now, is that the first time that we really met, I knew of you, I've heard of you before, and I had actually one of our mutual friends out of the Mesa salon there, and I talked about you, and she said, "Oh, I love that guy. He's helped me along so much." So it's a pleasure to have you here. But I also want to know that what's your background? How did you get involved in the hairdresser? Just in hairdressing, or in the industry as a whole? How did that all happen?
I think there's two unintentionally. So let me preface that way, unintentionally. And two people I would highlight. One would be my wife. She's a headhunter, a recruiter. And in 2003, she was recruiting for Bumble and Bumble. And at the time, I believe Estee Lauder was in the process of acquiring them, about 20% each year. Mm-hmm. And she was the sole recruiter. So it's going back some time, but I think there's about 53 people, including marketing, their VP of sales. And for anyone who will see this, I look the exact same way 21 years ago. So I hadn't...
That's the filters that we have on the camera, by the way.
Yes. It's actually, what is it? You can't believe anything you hear and 50% of what you see. So that'll be the case. So I hadn't actually been in a salon, very few, I'd been in barbershops, but not salons, and wasn't using hair products. So little to no knowledge of the industry. And so she said, I think this industry's wired for the work that you do, because I was talking about how people emotionally connect and the psychological part of what you do. And so probably about 6 months went by, and I'll wrap up the story, is that she said, an opening's come up. And so originally it was in sales, and then I got into their business school. And that's how I got in, really through my wife, set up the meeting. If your next question was, who'd you have to sleep with to get the job? In this case, it was my wife, and she was my wife when it happened,
Yes.
not before, like some people. Uh, so that's how that happened. So I would certainly give her the credit for that. And then there's a gentleman, Howard Hayfitz, and I don't know if you've heard the name.
Yes, I do. I know
Yeah,
him well.
he was, I believe, started what was now Salon Today magazine, and so we crossed paths. And he was second generation. His son Josh is third generation, and they both Josh had
Yeah.
served on the PBA, and great human beings separately, just very passionate and a very human side to them. And Howard introduced me to Dr. Lou Lisansi. And
Yeah.
he'd written a book, he'd written several books. I think he was up to 23 books, but he'd written a book, Psychosmetology. And Dr. Lou was fully committed and has been for some time, but he and I were close friends. And they said, hey, we'd like to chat with you, about converting this into a workshop. And so that's really what probably catapulted my speaking. I speak inside and outside the industry, do work inside and outside. But he would get a lot of credit. Howard Hayfitz, I appreciate this about him. When he met me, Josh, his son, and I were working together, and we got to talking, and he said, I can get people to recognize you. I can get people to be in the audience if you want to be on stage. And if you ever write a book, and I hadn't written one at that point, I can get people to buy it. And to his credit, he checked each and every box. So I hope I answered your question
Oh, wow.
succinctly, but those are the two people. There's certainly been people who have contributed along the way, but those are two people that heavily influenced my time in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I got a quick story about that you probably know already, and probably can correct me on if I've got it wrong, because I think you're a lot closer to Dr. Lou than I am. But there was a story that I can remember listening to him one time when he said that I went on stage or I was counseling this woman, and he said I told her what she should do, and I can't remember whether it was a divorce or whatever it was, but and he gave her all this advice of what she should do. And then she came back for the next visit, and he said, "Well, so did you do it?" He said, "Oh, no." And he said, "Well, why? What did you do?" He said, "Well, I did this and this and this." He said, "Well, why did you do that?" "Well, that's what my hairdresser told me to do."
Yeah,
So,
that is his story. He said it was actually disruptive to him because he was a psychologist, and at some level,
yeah,
he thought he was the most influential person in society, save someone's mother or father. But if you see where I'm going outside of that,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's why he went to Howard. He and Howard were actually childhood friends. And I don't know that they were in
yeah,
touch at that point, but he knew Howard was in the beauty industry. And he said, I want to have a conversation with you. There's something that's a little bit disruptive to me. Who is this person? And in addition to him being incredibly smart, he's incredibly funny as well. And so we got a chance to
yeah,
talk. And really, he was the first doctor hired in the beauty industry. And so where I didn't, know hair and hair care products, certainly at that time, I knew human behavior. My background was around leadership, and not I knew everything, but that was really where my passion was. And he really laid out that there were two sciences that were constantly at work in the beauty industry. One was cosmetology, everybody listening, be study hair, skin, nails, and then psychology. And this is where that psychosmetology came from, is the blending of the two. And his story really resonated with me. And like you, I've probably shared it. Sometimes I took the liberty and changed it. I never let the facts get in the good way of a story, Chris. Never, never. So I don't know if you could relate or not to that.
very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I told some version of that story.
It kind of sets me right into one of the questions, and I'm going to be very candid with you as well. Is when my going back in, and I took a look at your website, which by the way is great, And I advise, first of all, anybody that's on there should go just to find out how to get a hold of you, number one. And number two is you've got some of these great tips that you have in there that are only 1 minute, 2 minute long. And I thought they were amazing. And there's one on there that you talked about I want to go into because it sets what we're talking about right now. And I'm just going to say, and everybody knows what opinions are like, but I have this opinion, this thing that hits me. And we've been talking about the hairdressing industry and how people on stage always talk about that we're therapists amongst so many other things. And there's this there's this thing that always comes up about that we're so delicate when we're in when we're in talking to a client and we think of the right things to say to a client. And yet sometimes when we're with our either peers or in a team meeting or whatever, and there's that offense defense that can come up when it comes to emotional charge starting to happen. And so is there any words of advice that you can give to like owners or people that are that are working for owners or on their own and they're going into a meeting and they know that their emotion is high or that other people's emotion can come up? What advice would you give them? How would you ask them to deal with that?
No, Chris, I don't have any advice on that one. Sorry.
Okay, good. So moving on.
You should
next
talk
question.
to my web designer. They're the one who designed. I have no idea. Listen.
Make something up.
Yeah, I'm going to spitball here. Here's what I saw, and I'm going to answer your question directly, is that when I looked at business, and this is oversimplifying it, there's the product, the process, and the people. And I think where you're going is the wild card is always the people and those skills that come along with that. And, when you talk about leadership, you're really talking about communication. So now when you're talking about communication, you're talking about people, right? And then you talk about this emotion. And I think if we're going to launch into the conversation, that foundationally, this starts with emotional intelligence. And so for anyone listening, let me just put out this definition, and there's several of them, is emotional intelligence is just simply your ability to identify and understand an emotion in yourself and others, and then adjust your behavior accordingly. And the reason I lay that foundation there is to your point, is I think it's important before we go into conversations that are emotional, that we've checked our emotions. And I would like to invite people with the work that I do is to have this belief system that everything can really just be a conversation. And so part of that prep, I think, is having this emotional intelligence and being aware of your emotions and the other person's emotions prior to going into the conversation. So let me just stop there because I know you have a lot of experience in this area. And I'd love for you to jump in, tell me what your experience is, because you work with people at all different levels.
And I'm glad you said that. Meaning, said what you said. Not that I have. I look up to you in this regard, and I have stuff that I've learned along the way that could probably a pittance of what you have. But what I can remember sitting in a meeting because obviously I've worked, not obviously, but I've worked with corporations before, and
I couldn't
there's
tell
always
by
that thing
looking,
that happens.
Chris. By the way, it wasn't obvious. I couldn't tell by looking. So.
Well, they couldn't either, and that's they can wonder what the hell is he doing here.
I get the same reaction sometimes.
And sometimes I felt like I was the only connection between the real world of hairdressing and them. But no, I still looked up to them. But I remember the Gutman Group was a leadership group that they had come in and speak to all the directors that there were, and something that really hit me, and I don't know if I'm 100% on it yet, but they started to talk about the different kinds of people you're going to run into in a meeting and or just people as a whole. And we know my dad was a very aggressive person. He wasn't assertive. He was aggressive. He believed in, if you couldn't say it with a curse word, then it wasn't being truly emphatic. But he was an aggressive personality. And then you have what they called aggressive, passive aggressive, and then aggressive, assertive, and passive aggressive. And so there's those personalities that we have to deal with. So how would it, like, if you're one of the others and you're dealing with one of the others, because perhaps, and I'm might be taking too bold a step here right now, but sometimes we put authority figures into one of those categories, and I find that sometimes just I had to do a little quick talk just on the other day on a boss versus leader, and later I'd like to figure out your take on it to see if I was correct or not. But
So
maybe that
after
does that
you
make me
gave the
assertive or
speech, you want to now fact check and
yeah.
find out.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I said the right thing. So I'll go back and say,
Some
no, he
people
was
do
wrong.
it
I was right.
before. I just want to share with you, it's a different approach before they speak, but go ahead.
But if you're in a meeting, let's say you're in a salon meeting, and one person is aggressive, and the other person is trying to calm it because they're trying to think, as you said, it's about a communication. How can you get from not your emotion rising up and you going to one place? What would you advise that people did if one person is being really aggressive and then you're still trying to get a point across to that person, but they don't seem to be listening?
I think I want to answer your question. Sorry, I'm slowing down because probably like you, there's a lot going through my mind. I want to make some bullet points here. I think the skill of the future, both for leaders and individuals, is adaptation. And I think adaptation in the moment. So let me start there. I think one of the things, and so everything that I do, I want to be simple and executable, and at some level has universal applicability. So I'm going to give all the filters to this response.
Got it.
With the different behavioral based assessments, I think any understanding of human behavior is going to benefit you. Where I've seen people struggle is when they try to revert to that, and you articulated the different personality types, and now they're trying to categorize someone. They're trying to remember what the criteria is. So whether they assign letters to it or it's the stripe on the ball, the potential is what if you misdiagnose. So I want to share something with you, if you're listening, that you don't have to diagnose. It's universal applicability. If you feel as though there's this heightened emotion and passion around the topic, I would acknowledge and question. So to answer your question directly, what do you do to diffuse the situation? It's acknowledge and question. Now, again, I'm going to revert back to the emotional intelligence, and we can talk more about that if you would like, but it's my ability to identify and understand. So, Chris, if you and I were in a heated conversation, I would, one, identify it, because some people don't even identify that. And it's like, are you missing all the signs here? So people with a high emotional intelligence can identify it. The second part to this is to understand it. And so that's why I would acknowledge. So if you were coming on assertive in your words, I would say, Chris, you know what? I hear a lot of passion around this for you. Tell me a little bit more about that. And so what I'm trying to do is, one, let you know I get it. This is important to you. I'm not putting any judgment on it. I just picked a very neutral word. And then I'm trying to get more information and data, because I may not understand why you're upset. Or even if I think I do, I still need to validate it to make sure that I'm on track here. So I would acknowledge and question. And I think that could serve you well, whether you're doing a consultation, it's just a simple one-on-one, it's conflict resolution. When I say acknowledgement, I'm differentiating between that and validation, by the way. Validation is, oh, I see I made you upset, or you're angry at me, or I was wrong. And sometimes I think that's where people struggle, is that they say something they validate something that they don't feel as though is true. So I'm not asking you to validate the statement. It's just an acknowledgement that you have a lot of passion around this. And tell me a little bit more. Tell me what's driving that, or tell me what part I'm playing in your passion around this. And you get information. They go, well, you keep contradicting it, or you keep doing something that I told you that bothered me, or I don't feel as though you're hearing me. Now I have more information and data. And actually, I would just keep repeating the acknowledging and validating. And the acknowledging is not being patronizing by any means. It's just letting the person know, all right, I'm tracking with you to this point. I'm going to need some more information. So now I've identified the emotion. Now I'm trying to understand it. Once I do, the third piece of this emotional intelligence is to adjust my behavior. So if someone says, I don't appreciate you sitting there with your arms crossed and rolling your eyes, I don't appreciate you raising your voice at me, right? Now, if I'm asking and understanding, I can begin to adjust my behavior.
Right. I love that. And this has been really helpful for me as well, because I certainly don't have your background in this, but I've studied some of it and got it from some of my mentors. And the thing that helped me with this one is I've often, when somebody gets to you and their tone starts to go up, is that my teachers always told me, take a breath, and just sit for a second. So, because if you got, that person can be bordering on leveling up to insanity when it comes to getting aggressive or assertive or just plain angry. And if you get upset as well, then you got two insane people trying to figure things out, which doesn't work. I've also heard said, like was that is acknowledging that what's there. In other words, like if you feel like if you and I were having that conversation, I thought you were frustrated with something, I might say, Jay, I'm sensing that your frustration. Are you frustrated? Is that something that you would suggest, is identifying it with the person?
Yeah. What I loved about what you did is you asked another question. You're just seeking feedback. And that's something else that I talk about is soliciting feedback early and often. And again, the universal applicability, what is the consultation? It's soliciting feedback. Done technically, correct. What is a one-on-one with your team? Technically, it's getting feedback, information and data that helps you to improve your performance for that person. And the reason I'm giving you this definition that I came up with is that it's just feedback. People are like, well, is it good or bad? It's just information and data. When you ask them, you tell them, I hear this, I just need some information and data. Am I on track? They go, I'm not frustrated. They said, I'm pissed off. That's complete. I've passed frustration. Yeah. So now I have more information and data, right, to improve my performance. So I'd say, just so I understand, is it the situation or is it me? And they go, it's you. I go, well, that's great news, because if you'll tell me what to do, I can adjust that. If they go, it's the situation, it gives them context that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be directing this at you. So I love that you did that. And I love that you didn't assume. You didn't make a statement. You asked a question to get information, data to validate it. So again, information, data to improve your performance, by the way, for that person. Because you could talk with someone else. They go, no, I like this fiery exchange. This is how I process. It's nothing personal. I grew up in an Italian family or an Irish family, and this is the way we communicate. So again, you talked about the emotion. One of the things I want to caution the audience, I'm going to assume the majority of this audience happens to be in the beauty industry, is that my experience has been in an informal survey that pretty close to 99% of the people who are in our industry are empaths. They take on the energy and the thinking of the people around them.
Right.
So if somebody's angry, if they're happy, if they're frustrated, if it gets heightened, I'm not proud of it. I'm not an empath. I can show sympathy, not empathy. I don't take on another person's energy or thinking. And it works well for me sometimes. Like in a conflict, I'm not absorbing what you're doing. What works against me is when someone truly needs someone to cry with them and be excited with them. I kind of miss that. I intellectually know what to do, how to show up. I don't take on the energy and thinking. And so it becomes I think, a heightened conversation in our industry, especially when you look at the multiple generations now. the embracing of what I think and what I feel and what I know, and I should be able to share that 24/7. That you're an empath, how these conflicting emotions or these range emotions, especially if you're going to be a stylist, you're going to be a leader, you're going to interact with all these people, and you're going to have to adjust your style based on the not your values, but you have to adjust your style based on the needs of the individual. That can take a toll on you.
Yeah, yeah, and I love where you're going. I give you an example of just what you just said is because I think that what can happen is when you don't have data, then you've got conflicting stories trying to merge that don't merge together. And I remember our company was doing business with an Italian company, and we said, well, it came down to this. They said, well, look, in order to be 50-50 partners in this, and they said, well, we'll put in X amount of money and you'll put in X amount of money. And we said, okay, well, it should be this. And then, because this is what we're going to need. And they said, well, we don't have that much money. And we said, well, we'll put in that money and then you can pay this off later. And they got furious with us because we said, well, look, we'll still be 50-50. Well, as it turned out, we had to go through some counseling. And what happened was it was just merely that U.S. law and Italian law was different because Italian, I could say, hey, listen, Jay, we're going to get into business. I'm going to front all the money. We'll still be 50-50 partners. We'll draw up the agreement that way. And you can do that in the U.S. In Italy, it goes by the amount of money you put in, it dictates your shares. So they thought we were trying to muscle them out of shares, money, and ownership. And it wasn't until we got data and we said, okay, tell me why you're upset about this. And they said, well, here's why. And we said, well, look, in the U.S., it's a U.S. company that will be forming. So, and they cleared it up and they went, oh, okay. Well, then everything was calm. But, it was until you gain all that data back and you can do it level-headed, then it's going to result in a problem. So, I think that that counseling that you just gave everybody is something that we should really all take really close heed of, is that we need to just get data and then make a decision.
I think you brought up two very interesting areas. I think if we could go a little deeper, is that if you just, when I ask audiences, about feedback, how do you feel about it? How often do you solicit it? How do you take it? What I ask them about, more often than not, they say, well, it depends on if it's good or bad. What if data was neutral? Let me just shift your thinking there. What if it became neutral to you? And it, like you said, is information and data to help me improve my performance for this company in Italy. One of the things that you articulated exceptionally well was fundamentally where there could be a pinch point in communication. We judge ourselves by our intentions, and others judge us by our actions. You were like, hey, we'll work it out. My intention is, let's just pull this together. Let's get started. I trust you. You trust me. I trust you to the point that I'll put more into the game than you have to. And so when they got upset, I'm sure at some level you guys were like, our intentions were to make this work, for us to come together to get started.
Yeah.
Yet they judge the action. And I think that's important in communication, especially when there's conflict, to understand the intention behind it. And so one of the things in diffusing conflict is I will ask and encourage people to ask, if it has reached that point, is just so they understand, what are you thinking my intention is behind this conversation, behind that recommendation, I think is important. And so you mentioned conflict before, and if you don't mind me just bouncing back and forth, I want to leave the audience whole. So one is to understand the intention, to what they think your intention is. And by the way, before you tell them what your intention is, I would ask them what they think it is, first of all.
Yeah,
I think is important. And the other thing, I think, especially when things get heated, and I'm going to give you an extreme situation that I've been in, is I will ask people, tell me, I hear there's a lot of passion around this. Again, just a neutral statement there. How open are you to another perspective around this? And Chris, I've had people that, Jay, there's not a perspective now that I'm open to hearing. This is exactly what I want done, how I want it done. in which case, then if you've set those boundaries there, then, we'll move forward. I have had people say, well, I'm open to a different perspective. I'd say, well, what's the best way to
Yeah.
share it with you? They said, let me cool down a little bit. Let's pick up the conversation. Some people go, no, you can share it with me now. But what I've done is to help identify and understand and adjust my behavior to diffuse the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's why I think the personality types, any learning about people will benefit you. It's just if you get too caught up in trying to analyze somebody and then you are diagnosed and you misdiagnose, it could send you down a wrong path. What I want to share with you, I hope has universal applicability. So even if you understand their
Yeah.
personality types, regardless of who they are, this will still work for you.
Yeah, what I love that you said there, because I think that there's this, we're not talking, holding hands, singing Kumbaya together. That sometimes somebody's going to have to make a decision, and I think as long as you can collect data, help both sides see it, and then say, look, we've got to make a decision here. And somebody, and if you're the owner of the business, I mean, let's face it, to use a football analogy, I bought the football, so I've got to make the final decision of what it is based on the football. So I love what you were saying in there, and I loved about the intention. And I'm trying to draw back on. It's funny. I don't know if you're like me, but I'll often go back and I'll take notes that I've written like 3-4 years ago, and it's piled up on my countertop, and then I'll go and I'll start to pare them down and put them back into some kind of semblance. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And I was reading this one thing that a coach that I have gave to me, and I think it was like, and it'll show you how quickly I was getting at this stuff. I think it was from 2015, and he wrote down the words. Perception was one word that he wrote down, is that the perception that you were talking about, and it was, are you open? And because this is what sparked it when you said, are you open to a different way of looking at it? Is because that you have the perfection that you saw in what you were doing, and then the perspective of somebody else's take on it. And in this one, they were talking about there's two. If you did an exercise and you got 3 people, and you put one person says, "I have an idea," and then you tell the other person, "I've got a better idea," and then you tell them, "Okay, you've got to work this out," and you have a third person that comes in and says, "Are you willing to compromise?" Because we know that sometimes compromise is what has to happen. And then he said something different. He said, "Okay, next example. Okay, I have an idea," and then the other person says, "I have another idea." And this is where, like when you were talking about leadership, is a leader would come in and then said, "Are either or are both of you open to coming up with an idea that's even better than the one that each of you have right now, and getting together and talking about that?" And this is something I just put in. So this is obviously on the top of my brain here. And when you said that, that's what came to the top of my mind. How do you feel about that?
There's one piece of everything you said that I would just tweak a little bit. Is I wouldn't ask the question in a way that would get a yes or no response. So I would say, how open are you to considering a third perspective, so to speak? Is I would say, what would a third perspective be? So as a leader, I think you have to introduce, this is where we're going. I'm not flexible that there will be a third idea here. Where I am flexible is how we get here. And I think leaders, there's little nuances that they bring to the table like that. I think what is imperative for a leader too, which you modeled again, if anybody's listening, is that a leader really seeks out to speak last. And more often than not, I'm finding that leaders are coming in the room and they're feeling as though, let me just, empty my cup, so to speak. Here's what we're going to talk about. Here's what's going on. Here's my thoughts on this. And I think the reason I mention this, if you're listening, is that I think the biggest challenge for leaders today is that they feel insecure being in their role because they don't know what's going to happen and they don't know how they're going to handle it, even if it does, now that they know what's happening. And I think your ability, for lack of better terms, to show some humility is going to serve you well. But part of that's vulnerability, being that, you know what, I don't know the answer. However, I am confident between these four walls and who's in the room that we can come up with some of these solutions. And so I do have some thoughts. I'm going to hold on to them to the end, but I just want to go around the room and I want to capture some of your perspectives. That's how I would coach leaders today to go.
Yeah.
So for two reasons. One, I don't think as rapidly as things are changing, some people are skilled at it. I don't know if they're skilled at having the answers or if they're skilled at adapting and extracting their resources, meaning their people. Those are the people that I see that are most effective. It just requires you to be humble, especially if you've been rewarded your entire career for being the person with the answer or the go-to person. And I think for leaders, I'm working with an organization now, and that's really where I'm trying to move the CEO and the senior staff, is that, you know, if you're looking at a professional team, you're not the player, you're the coach, not the player. You're not throwing the touchdown, you're not scoring the basket, you're not hitting the home run. You're doing what that coach is doing and letting the players play. And I think that's the opportunity. But I'm seeing a lot of leaders that, you know what, they grab a jersey and they get in the game. And there people are like, all right, well, if you're going to play, there's no need for both of us to play this position. And I'll sit back and let you do it.
This episode is sponsored by the Salon Associate Accelerator from trainersplaybook.com. Are you struggling with the time and cost of associate training? Do you feel like your salon is running you? We'll get your associates on the floor, all with 90% less time from you, so you can get back to building your business. Get them world-class design, finishing, color, and client care skills they'll use every day for the rest of their career, while you focus on realizing your vision. Go to trainersplaybook.com and get the Salon Associate Accelerator. And now, back to the show. Yeah, it's interesting. What came to my mind as you were talking there was about John Maxwell. And for those people listening, probably wrote the manifest of whatever that is on leadership. But he was being interviewed by a mentor of mine, and they said, he said, "Well, what do you do if I'm giving away all my information, and then they don't need me anymore?" And John said, "Well, your job isn't about giving out information. Your job is to create more leaders." And he said, "You don't have to. Leaders aren't the smartest people, and they're not the most talented people. They're the leader because they can collect those people that are the smartest and know what to do." It was interesting. Hi, my name is Chris, and yes, I've been on Instagram. But the point was, I was on Instagram, and they had an old clip of Steve Jobs, and he said, he was being interviewed, and he said, "Do you know how many committees we have?" And the guy said, "No." He says, "Well, as big as we are, we don't have one committee. There's no committees in Apple. All we do is we have departments, and we put the person in there that we give the authority for them to do whatever they need to do in order to make it, because we hired people that are smarter than we are in that area. So we have to give them the autonomy in order to do their job." I want to spin that back to hairdressing industry, is that sometimes, hi, my name is Chris. I've been a salon owner, and I was an asshole because I tried to get everything about what was my name on the shingle on the roof and make it look like I did it. And the thing that I've seen is that the more that the boss or leader can incorporate other people and getting their ideas, their input, then that's the way that's the way you create loyalty and trust within your group. And they don't want to leave you. They want to stay on. They want the company to excel.
I want to break this down. There's so many great points you made. I think if somebody's listening today, the primary function of a leader today, and you gave multiple examples of people articulating this, their primary function is to improve the thinking of their people. And I didn't say this. I read this years ago. A futurist had written is that the leaders of the future will the gift won't be knowledge. Their gift will be their ability to help people think different. And this was years ago that it was said, and it's never been more true than today when you can get, I mean, with the evolution of really AI, not that it happened in the last 6 months, but it's gotten on everyone's radar in the last 6 to 8 months. Knowledge won't be your point of difference. I mean, it's one of the first things when I get on stage that I say is knowledge won't be my point of difference. You can literally Google or use AI to get anything that I said. If, and it's a big if I have a gift, it'd be my ability to give you new, different, and deeper thinking. And so as a leader, I think that is your role. It requires the humility, and you gave an example of Jobs. I'm humble enough to say that there are people smarter than me, and I'm going to bring them in. Now, am I humble enough to let them do what they do so that they can get the significance and self-worth and sense of belonging that they need so that I get this emotional commitment, this discretionary performance? So that takes a gift. Everything that I say feeds into this because now as a leader, the other reason you're asking questions, the reason every solution to everything that I do and everything you ask me would be to ask a question. Everything. We even demonstrate it with conflict. And leaders often worry, well, what am I going to say? As a leader with your people, that's why you lead with questions. I want to know what you know. I want to know what you think. And I want to know what you feel before I respond. And I also need to know, there's so many different dynamics, with why this isn't getting done. Is it a willingness or an ability? Two different conversations. I've seen where people go, well, my people ask me what to do. So I, give them an answer. You're assuming that they wanted an answer. They may have just wanted validation on their thinking. And that's interesting to me because I've started to ask people, going back about 6 or 7 years ago, well, before I respond, what do you think? I had a company, I had a partner, Josh, who I told you about in Howard. We're partners in a product company. And what I was finding is 80% of the time, they weren't asking for an answer. They were asking for validation on their thinking. And the reason I said that, knowing my role is to improve their thinking, let me hear what your thinking is. And if I have a chance to go, and by the way, not only, more often than not, if you hire the right people, do they have the answer? Quite often, Chris, they had a better answer than I did. And my being able to acknowledge that, develop their self-confidence, their self-direction, their ability to self-assess. And this goes back to, as a leader, am I improving their thinking? I wouldn't know if I give them the answer, I have no idea what their thinking is around that solution. If I ask the question, I can begin to gauge it. I can see where there's a pinch point. And if I'm going to improve their thinking, I'd ask another question. So I think the examples that you gave, John Maxwell and Jobs, those were examples of this same type of thinking. As our primary function is how do we improve the thinking of the people? And by the way, some of the byproducts that you talked about, the significant self-worth, sense of belonging, where people weigh in, they buy in, and where companies are looking at attrition and attraction now. How do I bring on people and how do I keep them? This is the way to do it. Let them feel as though they're part of what's going on.
Yeah. So quick, does this stuff work on your wife?
No, by the way, none of this works. If anybody's listening, this is just Chris and I having a conversation. So you asked, this is a funny question, and it's a great question. So when I was at Bumble, one of the things, I have a good friend now who's there, we pitched to Bumble and Bumble was a coaching program. And they were like, oh, okay. I said, yeah, the network is looking. Owners have no one to go to. Stylists go to the manager go to the owner goes to their spouse, burns out that relationship. So they were all in. So they let us sample different programs, ended up going to NYU to take their coaching program. To your point, Chris, they said the times not to coach, 2 times. One, when there's an emergency. So if the building's on fire, you're not going to say, Hey, Jay. So what are your thoughts?
What do
I
you
want to know
think?
what you're thinking is, yeah. The other part, though, Chris, is what you said was don't coach your spouse. It was a very direct thing.
Yeah.
So if anyone's listening, what I would share is there are pieces of a coaching framework, asking open-ended questions, acknowledging and questioning, that you can ask. However, to
Yeah.
your point, and I know you said jokingly, because that was my first thought. Wait, does this stuff work everywhere? Because I have a lab at home I could use. Yeah, so interesting enough, if you're doing it, there's some things that happen in an intimate relationship that just they tip the scale. So you can use components of it. So as an example, if people are listening, and this is low hanging fruit, but I want to be sensitive to anyone's situation. It would be the difference of you saying to your spouse, "Why didn't you take the trash?" versus, "Hey, babe, what would get you to take the trash on Thursdays?" The way that
Yeah.
what and why is actually a coaching. There's a science to it. Why takes you
Mm-hmm.
back in time is problem because why don't you take the trash on Tuesdays? Well, I work late on Tuesday in traffic, and I'm really tired, right? So you focus on the problem. The other thing is it puts the person on the defensive. Why were you late? Why didn't you
Yes.
get that report right? What questions are solution based and future based thinking? So if you say, "Hey, babe, what would need to happen?" And you go, "I don't know, if you gather everything around the house, so right when I got home, Seth coming in, it was right there, I could take it." So to answer your question in two parts, don't coach your spouse. However, there are elements that you can use that will serve you very well.
Mm-hmm. I remember because Rita and I are so close in our relationship and our business, meaning when I'm writing material or I'm doing stuff or I've learned something, I'll share it. And then so she knows some of the techniques. Like it's one thing to have a technique down and then use it, and the other one to be going, "You're using that technique on me, aren't you?" As I can remember, I just learned how to debrief, and that there is a science behind it. And I remember we were I can't remember if it was a heated moment or she was upset about something, and I was trying to be the in between. I was going to be magically debrief the situation and calm it down. And so I started with the first question, and she said, "Well, I won't use I'll use fuchsia. That's another nice word."
Okay.
And she said, "Don't you fuchsia debrief me." So
Ah,
I learned very quickly there. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't work on your spouse. So I agree,
we learned the
100%.
same lesson. No need for both of us to go through it. I wish one of us had shared with the other. No need for both. For anyone
Yeah,
listening, I appreciate you sharing that personal example because I think the idea is, as we're talking about these things, is that it's not how do you be one person at work and one person at home. How can you be the same person all the time? And so you using that
yeah,
personal situation, I think it's important. And again, you go back to asking a question because I had the same thing, and my wife. Well, I definitely won't repeat what she said. But basically, let me rephrase it a little bit. She was like, "I don't need work Jay, I need husband Jay." And not so much, Chris, but you know what I mean? I'm just cleaning everything up.
I'm with you.
Yeah, so I think it's important for the listeners there is that you can identify and understand just your behavior. So if this is going on with your spouse and your spouse says something, that this is not the time to be owner, it's not the time to be manager, it's not the time to be leader. You have to identify what role you need to be for that person in that moment. And if you don't mind me going off a little bit of a tangent, when I work with owners, it's the difference between being a consultant, a counselor, a coach, a critic, or a cheerleader to your people. And they all have value to them. It's just determining
Yeah,
which one's going to serve me best in the sense that it serves them best to improve their thinking.
yeah, yeah. And that's in one of your books that you have as well. So, that's
I haven't read them
because
recently.
it is
I'll
about
take
thinking,
your
isn't
word
it?
for it.
What's that?
I haven't read them recently, so I'm gonna have to take your word for it. I'm embarrassed to say that, but thank you for yes, it is because it's fundamentally true, and I think it stands the test of time.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It took me like Rita and I have been. I think it's 50, whatever, 53, 54 years we've been married, but it took me 40 years to figure out am I supposed to listen or am I supposed to solve the problem? And she said, no, it's just, and so I'll often start it with, okay, am I supposed to listen now? Okay, good. I'm listening. All yours. So
I
for
think
the husbands and wives that are out there,
I hope they don't lose that. I mean, if we could pause there for what you said, because again, I think it's highly relevant in your marriage. It's highly relevant whether you're doing a consultation in the chair, whether someone's sharing a conversation with you, someone's upset. Is that, first of all, congratulations on the 50. I don't want to assume same person, same marriage.
yes, same person. Yeah, only one person will
Okay.
take me.
Yeah, well, listen, I think you've been in this industry and just around long enough to know. I was talking to someone 2 weeks ago. They said, yes, the same person, but we were divorced for 7 years and then we remarried. So there's all kinds of criteria
Yeah,
that
yeah,
goes with that. I think if people could pick up your point that you said and they write this down is, do you want me to respond or do you want me to listen? That is a question that could serve you well because you might have an employee come in, right? Or you could have a client in the chair that's right, and just tell them, hey, just so that I know, did you want me to respond or do you want me to listen? And that's something that I've learned with my wife now is that I go, hey, babe, do you want me to respond or you listen? And I was guessing before and I was
yeah,
guessing
yeah,
wrong, I was guessing. And now she's just like, no, I want to respond. Sometimes she's like, no, babe, I just need to blow off some steam. I don't need any advice. And so, once again, that's an example of feedback. It's information and data to improve my performance for that person. So, I hope as people are listening, we're moving around in the conversation. However, they're not mutually exclusive concepts. All these things feed together.
yeah. Yeah, and you said two really interesting words that
Out of all of that,
I
there's only two. Thank you,
out
Chris.
of all of that. No, there was only two.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you saw, I was daydreaming the rest of
I
the time.
appreciate the feedback. Thank
No,
you.
well, there's one of them. I mean, and first of all, I don't want to. What you said was truly profound, but it was the fact that you used criticism as one of the words that your job as a coach is, but then you talked about the word feedback and just I found that there's sometimes flowery ways that you can work around. Like I'm going to give you some constructive criticism, but some still when you come up to me, and yet I suffer from imposter syndrome, and as soon as somebody says to me, "Could you give you some constructive criticism?" I keep going, "Well, what did I do wrong? Why did I mess
Yeah.
up? What did I do?" And yet, but yet I respond better to feedback. Now, is that just me? How would you advise people in leadership positions or just in general
I,
to phrase how they want to give somebody that they might not want to listen to
yeah,
or may not?
Chris, I so appreciate the nuances that you're going to because words carry weight. And you just gave a prime
Mm,
example. And for some reason, we felt as though nobody likes criticism, right? So what will we do? We'll put an adjective in front of it. It'll be constructive. And
yeah.
it changed nothing. Actually, they did studies. They measured people's blood pressure levels when they asked the group to give feedback and to ask for feedback, and it rose their levels exactly the same. So we have,
Oh, really?
yeah, we have this physiological response already to the word, and that's why when this it's actually a workshop that I do. It's called the F bomb. It's the word that begins with F, ends with K, and has a C between the two letters. And I ask people to guess. I could see by your face where you're going. It's feedback. Yeah, it's feedback. It's feedback.
Yeah. Yes.
Fire truck works as well. However, when people are looking at change, I'm not a change management expert. However, in the beginning of the process, I have gotten involved, and they said, "Where will we start?" And I want to start with what people know, think, and feel. So that before we do anything. So how do they define change is one of the things. But is there another word that we could use? Because what connotations are linked to it? And that's why with feedback, if I could just switch it in our culture, it's just information and data. So Chris, if I said, and we had established a culture when you talked about trust, And I just said, yeah, I just want to share like some information and data that I got that I think will enhance your performance, not only with your peers, but maybe with the management team
Yeah.
or even with your clients. I think you're like, yeah, bring it on, Jay. So there is no judgment there. It's just information data. Now, what you do with it can determine whether it benefits you or not. So I think what you said, I hope the listeners were listening, is look at the words and the weight that they carry. And so when you talk about that, the critic, I don't know, it's a great speech for anyone who's listening. Roosevelt gave the speech. It's called The Man in the Arena, is what the speech is. And so obviously you and I weren't born yet, Chris, when that came out.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I was even born later.
yes, you were. Yeah, is the
Mom always liked you best.
yes. Okay, so these start bringing in. Okay, these aren't trauma points for you, but I'm certainly not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read the first few sentences, and I think everyone will get it. And in this speech, he said, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of good deeds have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming." So I won't read the whole thing. I think it shifted my perspective. I don't want to be a critic. I'm going to be the guy who's sitting on the sidelines, not taking any risk. How often, I mean, if you and I could be real, like we both, speak on a stage, you to much larger audiences, of course, and for much more money.
7.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the chosen 7, though.
Yes.
Yeah, people will share this feedback. And they're the same people who go, "Oh, I could never speak. It's my fear." And yet they'll critique you as, you get up there. And so if you can shift your thinking about feedback, for me, it's information data, improve my performance. I get excited. Let me give an example. I don't boast about my failure, but I've learned a lot from it. And I've, quote unquote, if you had common definition, have several things that will qualify as failures. They weren't really to me, but one of them was late last year, in the fall of last year, I'd been working with someone I hadn't met. And so I did something remotely with their team via Zoom. And they said, "Hey, I'd like for you to work with the leadership team." And we had a call. And the second call, they said, "This is going to be our last call." And they said, "Oh, tell me about that." They said, "This feels a little bit too much like therapy." And, was I hurt? Sure, because my intent was to help, right? And this was something that's about what I'm passionate about, my belief system. And so, I listen, for anyone that's listening, I'm still human like you. I want people to love me, to like me, those things. And so, as I thought about it, I thought, well, wait a second, where did things go wrong? I asked them for feedback. They gave it to me. Okay, that worked out fine. They shared the feedback I didn't like. I went, aha, because I've gotten feedback before and it didn't bother me. When they go, "Oh, Jay, you were great. You really helped us out," right? So interestingly enough, Chris, this was on a Thursday, and I was bummed. I mean, for anyone listening, I still take that personal because I try to be self-aware and self-adjust. And if I didn't spot that, what else am I missing, right? Just to be real with you.
Yeah.
On Monday, I have a call, and it happened to be a group of 12 people. And they said, "Hey, listen, I got some feedback. I want to check in with you guys. I was fired on Thursday, and the reason is they say it feels like therapy." Chris, everyone smiled. I thought, "Oh my God, I'm going to get fired by 12 people simultaneously." They're like, "Here's the out we're looking for." I said, "You guys are smiling, so tell me a little bit." And they all kind of knowingly said, "Yeah, it does feel like therapy." And they said, "We like it." And I said, "How do you define therapy?" And they said, "We have a problem, we talk about it, and there's a solution to it. This is what we love about the exchange." And it really drove home the point that feedback's just information and data to improve my performance for that person. If I had changed my whole approach, I would have lost those 12.
Them too.
My gift was to identify and understand and adjust my behavior. And so where I can't say, "Hey, does this feel like therapy?" or, I'm not going to do something like that. I will let them know that there is a component that's psychology, and people often intertwine psychology and therapy, and I just want to differentiate. So I said, well, what can I learn from this? And this is where all the emotions began to dissipate for me, because I was like, what can I learn from this? And it's not an indictment for me. And by the way, there were people who had therapy that had a positive experience, right? So that's what they were linking to this. There's people who have a bad experience. Now we're identifying problems. We didn't fix this. We probably won't be able to fix that. So I hope I strung that together well. Feedback, information data to improve your performance. If you can remove the emotion and the need to justify whether it's right or wrong. That was another thing. The initial path I went down was, well, I told them that it was psychology and not right. I began to rationalize and defend and explain. And I was operating as though that was the truth. It was their truth. And here's what I've learned. There's their truth and there's the truth. Sometimes they're the same. Not always. Not always.
Yeah. I think the example is so profound. And I want to relate that back to something that happened to me just last week, where if somebody wouldn't have given me the therapy, I would have gotten nowhere. And it was with my coach who whether it's therapy or coaching or business or whatever it is, he has the ability to share with me the things when, and some people call it processing. Some people call it clearing. Some people call it a yuckberry that's in the back of your mind that holds you back from getting your success and being who you truly want to be. And it isn't until somebody has the skill to bring up that yuckberry to process, to clear that thought away so you can move on. And it was interesting. I didn't think I had that many, or I didn't think it was that bad. But he said, can I stop the meeting right where we're at right now? And he said, you have a command thought that is stuck in your brain. And then he asked everybody was okay if we moved on with this. And I said, yeah, it's perfectly fine. And he said, you said, trying to remember back to exactly what my phraseology is because he got me to change it. I'm trying to make it better. I have to make it better. And so he helped to clear that. I won't go through the process, but he helped to clear that thought and to readjust what my command phrase was that was in my brain. And he finally got me to reorganize it. It took me a while to change the words of those from I just need to make it better into I deserve to have the choice of when to make it better. Because I'm always on that perfectionist side that always wanted to go there, but I had to change the phrase that I keep saying in order to do that. And I want to spin that around full circle, is that probably what some of those people needed in that group was the clearing that they were getting, and they probably didn't like the results. And this is, again, just an opinion, and we know what those are like. But I just think that for myself, I like when that can clear me, so I can actually get to a next level up if it's only a centimeter or two. So,
It's a great.
you got my hats off for helping to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I hope the audience is listening because it's really a great example of your coach or the parole board. What you said, coach?
It was parole.
I was thinking about the parole board. Yeah, it's nice.
I've only got 30 more days.
Yeah, glad that you're on the way out. It's a great example of his primary function was to improve your thinking. And by giving you new and different thinking, that was his gift. It wasn't knowledge. And I think for people listening, especially for someone, well, let's just say you're chronologically wiser than, it's we get hardwired though, right? That we have these beliefs that we've had year after year after year. And so I love that you shared it with the audience. And even at the point that you're at, that there's the neuroplasticity of the brain to change. And I think it was up until like 1982, 3 or so that we didn't know that there's the neuroplasticity that there is. That's why when someone said, hey, that's just the way I am, we thought, okay, that's the end. And what we found is that that's actually the beginning now. And so I love that you share with people, even in the work that you do, and as many people as you speak to, is that we can all become victims of this. And if people would make this note, something that really changed my thinking too, is I realized not all my thoughts are true.
Yeah.
It was just, and like what you just had, it's a thought. And sometimes I have to vet that. I got a text from someone late last night. I was like, WTF? Like, I'm just trying to be nice. And their response, I was like, and where did I go, Chris? Right?
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
I go, yeah, the thought. And by the way, we've been texting back and forth. They would have been shocked if I responded to the way I thought. And so having the flexibility like you did to go there with them and go, you know what, let me just re-examine my thoughts. There's a great example. There's a gentleman, Adam Grant, and he's a thought leader. He's right up there. He's at the University of Penn, and he posted something 2 days ago that was really interesting. He said, we often look at people, and if the people they hang out with don't measure up to our standards or theirs, we always say, you know what, you could do better. You need to raise your standards. He said, you could also look at that person and go, what a compassionate individual, that they don't have some of these filters and judgment, and that they will spend time with anyone. And I thought it just validated what I learned in life, that things are what they are. They hit that person standing in a group with those people. It is what it is. It's your thinking that determines it. On the one hand, you're like, yeah, I was thinking of who my boys hang out with, and that's a reflection of them. I never thought that, you know what, are they just altruistic people that don't have the same filters I do, and that, they're willing to spend time with anyone because they see a different value. So to get back to the conversation that you had for the listeners, at any age, we still can fall victim to this or succumb to it. And you used a great word, is that it's a choice. You said that. Those were your exact words, is that it's a choice. And that's what I've learned. Last night, I had a choice. You had a choice in that moment. And you said, I'm going to choose. Yeah. And I think for human beings is that we get a little bit lost or disconcerted when we feel as though we don't have control. I think that's what people are struggling with now. They don't control their circumstances. We control our thinking and how we perceive those circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that right there says it all. If anybody that's out there listening right now, I think what you do need to do is your books they're on Amazon, yeah? Yeah,
they are. Both books are. That sounded very arrogant, right? I mean, boastful. Yeah, there's more than one. I could have said yes. See, that ego.
But you can only read one at a time, but they should buy both and get them. And I don't mean that I do mean it as a sales plug, because I think if they've been listening to you for the last hour and you didn't take away something, then you weren't listening or weren't open. And I know that people that are on there are. The people that come to this one are. And I know that this versus that, better thinking and leaving your mark about thinking skills, etc. Those are two books that you should have. If you've all liked what's going on here, you should definitely jump on Amazon and get those books, because I can't thank you enough. And I wanted to get this out right away because I want to go to our rapid fire questions, but I just want to make sure that people know of those books and get them. Okay.
I appreciate that. Can I just add stuff before you do? I just want to add, for those of you who do buy the book, I thank people twice. Once for buying it, and second time if they read it. So I'm not judgmental. I just want to tell you that 100% of the profits of the book go towards helping human traffic. Not helping it. I'm sorry. It's doing fine on its own. Let me differentiate. Going towards stopping, and fighting human trafficking. And so there's just something in the area that someone brought to my attention at church probably about 9 years ago. And I thought it was in some third world country. I didn't realize it's in our backyard. And so, I just want to tell you is that you're immediately leaving your mark when you do that, because 100% of the profits. Yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I did want to add that.
No. Point well deserved. And but if people want to get a hold of you, and if they want to chat, find out how to get you to at a speaking event or whatever, where would they go?
Yeah. So you guys, I've tried to make it easy. You can go to thejwco.com. So just thejwco.com. And there's actually, if you want to reach out, and I'm open to all conversation. I return all calls and emails within 24 hours. So please know that. And you can schedule time. There's a calendar. So if you just want to connect, or you say, hey, I just want to chat through, see if it makes sense to have a second conversation, comments, feedback, I value all of that. There's this thing called social media. Have you heard?
Hi, my name is Chris.
Okay.
I've heard tell.
There's a rumor out there. Yeah. So for those of you who, and I think you can relate to this, everyone's trying to be different in the exact same way. I don't fault them because I don't know that I figured it out. So if you go there, you can go Jay Williams Co. to both Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. And I've tried to respond to the human being's attention span now. So there's going to be these short 15-second just thoughts that hopefully trigger conversation for you. So those would be a J-A-Y Williams C-O, and that's Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And there's a YouTube page. I'm getting help, Chris, to be honest with you, if I seem a little slow. No, I know it's important. I do. I'm not minimizing it by any means. But I know that that's important as well. And you may need to edit this last part out, but it's on TikTok too.
No.
Well, you may. No. Let's just say where
about
legislation goes.
The TikTok thing.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, we're irreverent. Wait till you get to the questions I'm about to ask you. And
so apologize in advance. Okay, fire away. Thank you for that shameless plug.
Okay. So this is kind of like just rapid fire stuff. So just whatever comes to the top of your head. Now, and I know whether it's psychology, numbers, or whatever, there's still a creative process. But what turns you on in the creative process?
I think when people have conflicting perspectives, it's confrontation. I don't know that that's necessary. I think conflict is conflicting thoughts and perspectives. So what turns me on is when we're having a conversation and people ask a question or challenge, it just pushes for deeper thinking. And I really get excited. When I meet someone, it's intellectually a draw to me when they have alternate perspective.
Love it. What stifles a creative process with you? What stifles the creative process?
When people can't clearly articulate their words, that just slows everything down for me, Chris. And it's not you, it's me, by the way. I need to work on that. So again, it's not
touché.
Yes. What stifles it for me is these comments. Well, we've done it this way for 18 years. Or, you know what, why change now? Or I wouldn't be very good at that. It really is a rub for me because I'm not asking you to change as much as I'm asking you to evolve and grow. And I think for anyone, the work that we do today, here's the deal, is that for me to be effective, you've got to care more than me about what we're doing. And when you share comments like, well, this is the way I've been doing it for 18 years, I'm this age, I'll never be good at that. That stifles, I think, in organizations, people's lack of receptivity to alternate perspective, thinking.
Yeah, good words. Thing in life that you dislike the most?
The thing I dislike, from a food perspective, it's going to be liver and green peas. In just full transparency, pretentiousness, whether it's in a restaurant, a resort, or a person, that bothers me. I have something that's new that's bothering me is when there's a lack of reciprocity with people. So they want you to be really sensitive to their needs, yet they're not willing to be sensitive to your need to adjust to their needs. People want you to be flexible, yet they won't be flexible with you and how we get to that flexibility. So it's a newfound pet peeve. I got to work with my paw. Sorry, I was swallowing. I don't hate pets. New pet peeve. Yeah, I just want to differentiate. Yeah, I'm seeing now there's just not this reciprocity in society that what I want from you, you're willing to give to me.
Yeah. And what do you love most in life? What is it that you love most in life?
I love kindness. A friend had a birthday party, and I saw these people. And when you see the best part of humanity, people are kind and thoughtful and generous. Not so much with money, generous with their time, with their attention. I love that in life. One of the things I'm getting to that point. I'm assuming that you're over 30, Chris. Is that
Just.
barely?
Just.
Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
maybe you can.
I grade early.
Okay, yeah, it works well for you though. Nobody can tell that you're aging there.
No.
I think you can relate to this. We're at a similar spot in life that what makes us happy is the things that money can't buy, and it's usually things like kindness, a hug, humor, lightness. I feel old giving you these responses. I sound like someone's 104 years old. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
You shouldn't, but
it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
If you just want to hold, just hold my rocker. My walker.
Yeah. Well, they're same. Yeah, we'll be using both.
Most difficult time in your life?
You can almost get me to cry. I'm going to answer instantly, and then maybe it's another conversation. There was a time, I've been married 34 years, certainly not, the length you have. However, we may have encountered some things, where you have seasons that just, they're not, if everything's good, they're not great. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And there's a period of time that my wife and I were going through a season, and I realized one of my core values was being challenged. And just us navigating through, it was the hardest time, and it was the best time for us. It hit reset, and there's some misunderstandings there too, right, about our values and how we define them. And it was really the hardest time because I grew up in a situation where my mom was married 4 times. She wasn't married to my father. And failure to me is, and no disrespect to anyone who's out there, I'm really just talking about my situation, was if I didn't make my marriage and my family. So there's a great deal at stake. And so I was really blessed in that situation to be married to someone that, we're going to talk about every option and how to fix this. It's just divorce is not one of them. So anything you want to talk about, that's included.
Yeah.
So, dude, that was an Oprah moment. You almost got me to tear up.
Yeah.
Almost. I didn't. Because I'm not an empath. There you go. Here's where it works.
I'm not Oprah. I'm not Oprah.
There you go. Okay.
I don't have her money either.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Okay,
I was going to look under my chair for something.
Proudest moment of your life?
Proudest moment of my life is I've always had this insecurity. I didn't finish high school. I moved out when I was 16, and I lied. Not that I lied, it just wasn't forthcoming about a lot of things in my life. And part of it was my lack of education. And, it seems like the greatest moments go back to my wife, as, we talk about it. But as a recruiter, she was recruiting a group of 8 people. We're going to do a project at Microsoft. And, she would tell me about the project. And the project, I was doing a leadership program for globally 1,000 of their managers. And she was talking about the content. She goes, this is stuff you would love and you would absolutely be great at. And I said, yeah, a little bit outside, above my pay grade. She goes, I don't think so. And so she was telling me about some of the candidates, and some of them had graduated at the top of their class at Harvard and Yale. They were being very specific. And she said, babe, you can do this. I'm talking to these people. And I said, listen, I love you and have a great deal of respect for you. And I never want you to jeopardize, your reputation. And she goes, I'm not with you. And so she actually put me on the phone with this guy who's written 2 New York Times bestsellers. By the way, this has nothing to do with me. It's just my appreciation, and shared the stage with presidents and, been the Bill Gates' house on multiple occasions with the top 100 CEOs. So we get on the phone. I'm nervous as can be because this is going to shine the light on my very insecurity. And so we talk, and about an hour. He said, "I'm going to ask you one final question." And I didn't even know how I had done at that point. He said, "Can you change the world?" And I don't know if you know this, but sarcasm is my mechanism in life.
You sure you're not Canadian?
So, if it's a compliment, then yes, I am.
Yeah.
I said, "I can't believe this boils down to a Miss America contest question." And he goes, and he has a sense of humor. And he said, "Yes, it does. Can you?" I said, I got to tell you, because so much is at stake, you just got to know who I am. I don't know if I can change the world, but I believe I can change myself. And I believe wholeheartedly the change in me, what I've seen, can yield a change in at least one other person. And I get goosebumps as I tell this story. He goes, "I want to see you in Seattle." And so I was picked as one of these people. And the proudest moment was marrying someone. And I wish this for everybody, who believes in you more than you believe in yourself. And for anybody who's listening, maybe you've seen me speak or you're thinking about it, you go, "Wow, this guy has insecurities." I think you can relate to, we're all human. Yes, those things still exist, and there will still be moments and situations that expose them. And what can get you through is certainly your thinking. More often than not, you need someone outside yourself. And, if you're a person of faith, which, I am, or you have someone who believes in you more than you believe in yourself. So that was my proudest moment. I wish I could give it to you a little bit cleaner, but that was it.
Now, I'll tell you and the one thing that I know about Oprah is when there's a pivotal moment that's happening in the talk, you stop there, because that was truly profound. And I just, Jay, I just want to say thank you so much for being on here, sharing your wisdom, sharing your thoughts, sharing your vulnerability. It was just a real pleasure. But I also want to go back and ask the first question again. That are you happy that you've been on the podcast?
I am. I think for people, and I'll wrap up this way on the stage, we've all witnessed people on stage, and listen, maybe within the industry, or they're comedian, or it's music, and then you meet them one-on-one. It's not the same experience. I don't know if you've had that experience, and I am, and I appreciate you because I saw you on stage and certainly enamored. I think there's a certain humor, amongst other things, and lightness to things that we share, amongst other things. And then, for you to ask, and then for you to be that same person on stage, it's not persona, it's who you are. I would say at this point, I'm very, very glad that I got that opportunity. And now I can experience what my friend, Chris Salome, said about you. 100% agreement. 100% agreement.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you asking.
Well, thank you. Well, as I said before, make sure you pass on to Chris and say hi. And I'm always thinking about him and so on, and I'm proud of him. But I'm also proud of you, pal, for everything that you've done. And I know that what I love about doing this particular podcast is learning that we have so much in common, and all of it is about learning from what we do and helping to change the world one person at a time, and you certainly do that. So one more time, thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. It means a lot to me.